key features on the graphs of quadratics. Remember, we call those parabolas. So let's say, if you look over on the side here, I want to graph this parabola. So I'm going to just type it in my window, y equals -2x, and then I'm going to use this button where it says a squared to get the squared term, plus 4x plus 3. All right, now I can see my parabola. Now, one of the things we talk about when we look at parabolas is whether or not it opens up or down. So Mr. Bennett talked a little bit about how we tell that. So what I always think about is whether or not the U shape is up or is upside down. And so if you take a look here, we know that if I move my graph, it's just going to keep going down and down forever. So I think of it as opening upside down. So we would say that this one opens down. Does it have a maximum or a minimum? Well, when we talk about that with a graph, we're talking about a highest point on the graph or a lowest point on the graph. And if we trace our graph, if we go up our graphs, our y values are going up. We're going up on the graph, and then we're going to come back down. So it has a high point. So we say our graph has a maximum. I can spell today, maximum. Now, our graph has a symmetry line. All right, if we draw a line right down the middle here, all right, right through this peak, we can see that it's going to divide our graph in half, and the two sides are mirror images of each other, if you think back to geometry. So when I look at it, I want this center line to go right through x equals 1. So I'm going to type in x equals 1. I'm going to change that color there just so we can see it a little bit better. I'll make it blue. And if you see it, the line goes right down through the center of my graph. That's called the axis of symmetry. So another word for axis is line. I'm going to add that to it. And so when I do an axis or a line of symmetry, it always is going to have the form x equals something. So the line goes straight up and down. And that is my line of symmetry. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 1. The vertex. The vertex is the peak of our graph here, either at the very top or the very bottom of our U. And so if we notice here, I can actually touch on this point. If I just touch it with my finger, it'll tell me the ordered pair of the coordinates for my vertex. So remember, the word coordinates is talking about an ordered pair. So that point is called the vertex, and it's that peak. And so I would just type in 1, 5, and notice on Desmos, it will plot a point there so you can check your work and make sure it's in the right spot. All right, now let's talk about our intercepts. Remember, intercepts are where it touches one of our axes. So I labeled the x-axis and the y-axis just so it's a little easier to see in Desmos. All right, and so the points where the graph touches the x-axis is there and there. And so those are my two x-intercepts. And so I'd always want to write those as ordered pairs. So again, I can touch on them. A lot of times they'll be nice whole numbers. So negative 0.581, comma 0. So notice it's right on the x-axis. That's my first x-intercept. And then if I touch on the other side here, I can see 2.581, comma 0. I'll have to add one more. So I'll put 2.85, comma 0. Oops. 2.58, sorry, I said that wrong. 2.581. Again, you can touch right on the graph and it'll show you those x-intercepts. The y-intercept is where the graph touches the y-axis. And if you look at the graph, you can see that if I start here at the center, I'm going 0 to the right and up 1, 2, 3. So my y-intercept is the point 0, 3. And it's touching the graph right there. All right, then domain and range. Remember, domain is always our x values. And in a parabola, the domain is always all real numbers. Because if I were to zoom in and really look at the graph, notice that I can keep going down and it's just going to get wider and wider and wider as I go down. So eventually my graph will include every possible x value. All right. Now, the ranges of my y values. My parabola, remember, goes up to the top and comes back down. And so it has this high point. This vertex is the highest point on my graph. All the y values on the red parabola are below that. So I would say my range is y is less than or equal to 5. And when I look at it on Desmos, it's kind of nice because I can see that the blue shaded part covers my parabola exactly. It doesn't go any higher than that peak. So I know I have the correct range. That's the key features of the graph that we want to look at when we're talking about parabolas.